Okay, so right now it's Friday, August 22nd. We are about to shoot the Bambu H2S review. But the way this works is we've had this printer for almost a month now, but no word on pricing. In fact, we were ready to shoot this review not knowing what the price was going to be. Typically, our press contact sends us the pricing maybe a day or two before the product's announced. So I have some guesses in my head for what this printer should cost. Of course, we'll go over all the features in the review, but based on its functionality, I think it's probably going to be $1,500 with the printer itself and maybe $1,700 with the AMS2. That's my estimate. And as we're setting up, the email just came in. I clicked on it, I haven't read it, so it's Schrodinger's email right now, and we're gonna do a little bit of a reaction. So again, if it's $1,500 or less, I think that's a pretty good value for the H2S, $1,700 with the AMS2. And if it's under $1,400 for this, I'm gonna be ecstatic. I think it's great. All right, here we go. Whoa. The H2S MSRP, $1,250. That's $250 less than I thought. The combo is $1,500. That's with the AMS2, and the full laser is $2,100. That is much cheaper than I thought this printer was going to be. Wow, $1,250, and that's factoring in all the tariffs and all the price increase they had for the H2D. I'm genuinely surprised. Okay, I gotta think about this, and now we're gonna shoot the review. Hey everybody, Norm from Tested here, and today Bambu Lab has announced their newest printer, their second new launch this year, following up on the H2D that we reviewed earlier this year. This is, of course, the H2S, a single nozzle version of the H2D. Simple as that, right? Review over. That's kind of what we expected. A little bit predictable, if not expected as a follow-up. But no, there are more nuanced differences and I think some interesting things to discuss with this printer. So if you haven't been following Bambu Lab's whole lineup of printers, the big thing they came out with earlier this year, 4 months ago, was the H2D. And in fact, when that came out, we weren't even sure what those letters even stood for. We now have some clarity. H stands for hybrid or hyper, depending on who you ask. Hybrid because, surprise, it was also a laser cutter in addition to a 3D printer. You can also use it as a 2D, two-axis plotter. So that was novel and new. The 2, we thought, because it was a dual nozzle extrusion system. You can use up to 5 different filaments using their AMS. That's not what the 2 stands for. 2 stands for second generation. So from Bambu Lab's perspective, this printer, along with the H2D, represents all the learnings, all the engineering and software improvements they've made in developing their X line, P line, and A line of printers before it. So things like a more refined Core XY movement system using linear rails as opposed to the carbon fiber rods that were in the X1. An extrusion system that now uses a servo motor as opposed to a stepper motor. So that is now a closed feedback loop system. So it provides actual useful information to the controller board so you can detect resistance in the filament being extruded. You get more consistent high torque at high speeds, and all the niceties, of course, it being a much larger build volume as well. The D on the H2D ended up being the dual nozzle system. So of course, H2S, single nozzle, that makes some sense. So in following up the H2D, there are a couple different ways that Bambu Lab could have gone, and I think they went for what we had kind of thought the H2D was going to be, X1 or P1 type of printer, but sized up. We wanted the larger build volume, and that's what we got. Although larger is kind of a complex story. So let's try to break it down. Remember, the H2D had technically a 350 millimeter by 320 millimeter by 325 meter build volume, but Not in all cases. Because of the way the dual nozzle worked, each nozzle could only cover so much of the build plate. So if you were using one nozzle, let's say the left nozzle, you could only print 325 by 320 by 325. If you're using the right nozzle, you could print right aligned 325 by 320 by 325. If you were printing multi-nozzle, multi-color with both nozzles, it would have to be where their build volumes overlap. So an area of actually 300 by 320 by 325. The 350 only came about if you were printing with both nozzles, but never had the left nozzle print into the dead zone of the right nozzle, and similarly never have the right nozzle print into the dead zone of that left nozzle. So in your slicer, the way you configure your model, use multiple colors, you could technically print something 350 millimeters, 30 centimeters wide on the x-axis. The H2S, much simpler, but it's now 340, so kind of split the difference. You don't get the extra left or the extra right, 340 millimeters wide, that same 300 millimeters deep. Surprising to me though, well, that makes sense in retrospect, 340 millimeters tall. You get an extra centimeter and a half. And you get that because with the dual nozzle system, the left nozzle switched by moving up and down, that left nozzle. And that clearance is what you reclaim by having a single nozzle system. So 340, 320, 340. Massively improved over if you're on the previous generation line of the 256 by 256 by 256 asterisk on the X1 line, but still not in its class the largest kind of printer that you can buy. Like the Prusa XL is 360 by 360 by 360 millimeters. In printing objects, I would define this as human scale. It's what I call the H2D and other large printers that we've printed. So if you print things like heads, arms, hands, you can fit 2 forearms and hands in this printer at the same time, no problem. If you're someone who works in costuming and cosplay, armor pieces fit in here pretty comfortably. The biggest armor piece, of course, being something like a helmet. And Bambu Lab actually, to tout this printer, sent us and sent all the reviewers files of cosplay armor to print. I immediately went to print the helmet, and that helmet, well, it fits in this build volume. I would say it's a pretty snug fit for anyone with a normal sized head. So I would say maybe more like a young person or a kid's helmet and armor easily. But for larger folks, it's more human scale, not human armor scale or human helmet scale necessarily. And one of the big places I think could have been improved if they didn't want to reuse a bunch of the chassis as the H2D is elevating that z-axis. If I know the footprint, if you scale up the build volume, the footprint's gonna be big. This is already a really heavy printer that's massive compared to the previous generations. You could fit an entire A1 Mini in this build volume. But if you just went up on the z-axis, give me 400 millimeters, printing a helmet with spikes, angling a helmet to film that, you would be able to get a lot more and wouldn't risk the instability or the risk of stability of the motion system by expanding the x-axis and y-axis. Something to consider in the future, maybe, Bambu Lab. But this is not just a printer just for printing cosplay and armor. This is a professional printer that works way more than just for PLA. And it has all the hallmarks that the previous X1 and X1E printers had, and the H2D, of course, in terms of being temperature controlled in 3 places. You have a nozzle that goes up to 350 degrees Celsius. You have a heat bed that goes up to 120 degrees Celsius. And you have, thankfully retained still in here, an active heated chamber that goes up to 65 degrees Celsius. And that heated chamber is done with a dedicated heating element next to a fan. So it's not just using the heat bed and circulating the air like the X1C did. Actually, like the X1E and the H2D has that dedicated chamber heater. So you're going to be able to print all sorts of exotic materials. So everywhere from PETG, which this machine absolutely nails and is a workhorse for, to things like polycarbonate, nylon, ASA, TPU, no problem. You know, everything that we experience with the H2D in terms of how reliable this machine is and how quiet, honestly, it runs so surprisingly quiet. It doesn't have a ton of vibrations. All that compensation stuff has been inherited in here, and it has really, like I said, become a workhorse, not just for PLA, but for here in our office, in our studio, for PETG. Now, something that was potentially a concern in the community and it was noticed by reviewers of the H2D, specifically Stefan over at CNC Kitchen, is that the heat bed actually uses a heating element that is not evenly distributed. We actually put our thermal camera on the heat bed and watched it heating up, and sure enough, just like on the H2D, on the H2S, it can kind of see like an S pipe of heating element underneath that heat bed. I wouldn't call that a cause for concern. In our tests running first layer prints on a variety of materials, the first layer came out perfectly across the entire build plate on the bundled textured build plate. And the idea is that in its warm-up period, if you wait for that 7 to 10 minute time as it's printing, the variation in heat goes away and you get a pretty even heat bed across the entire build plate. But if you're working with materials that do need a higher temperature, look at that heat map and place in the slicer your objects over those heating elements to ensure the best reliability and adhesion to the build plate. So let's talk about this nozzle, because it is a single nozzle, and at first glance, it kind of looks like the extruder nozzle system of the A1. It's not exactly that though. Like I said, this has that servo motor for moving the filament through the extruder. That's I think a technically improvement over the stepper motor, but it does also retain from the H2D and the A1 the easy swappable nozzles. So it comes bundled with a hardened steel 0.4 diameter nozzle, and that's what we did most of our testing with on the H2D. So with the H2S, one of the things I wanted to do was experiment more with different nozzle sizes. You can buy 0.2, 0.4, 0.4 high flow, 0.6, and 0.8 millimeter diameter nozzles. And for today's review, I did on the extreme ends a bunch of printing on both 0.8 and 0.2. On the 0.8 diameter nozzle side, I wanted to go with what would be considered maybe the lowest resolution print that you can print at this size. So 0.8 millimeter diameter nozzle, and in the slicer, you can have your layer heights as high as 0.56 millimeters, and also a line width up to 1.2 millimeters. And printing with those settings, I was able to print really quickly, almost like twice as fast as using the standard 0.4 and 0.16 or 0.2 millimeter line heights. And what I was impressed by is how good a model still looks printing at this low resolution. Yes, the layer lines become very visible, but there's almost like a lo-fi aesthetic to this that's actually pretty pleasing while still retaining a lot of geometry detail in the low resolution. So don't knock 0.8 millimeters if you're printing something that needs to be printed fast, but you still want some of that surface detail. On the flip side, 0.2 millimeter diameter, that of course takes a much longer time to print. I wanted to go with what was the finest resolution type of object you can print. So this is 0.2 millimeter nozzle printed at 0.08 millimeter line height, and I was absolutely stunned by the amount of detail on this. I can't see the layer lines at all. It looks to my eye like a colored resin print, but it feels like filament, undeniably feels like filament. And for anyone making miniatures and minis, like don't think that filament printers can't print high quality miniatures without having to deal with resin as an option. So this is really, really cool. One thing to note though, the 0.2 millimeter nozzles are prone to clogging. So ours did end up clogging after a couple prints, although there is troubleshooting built into the printer to walk you through the steps of doing a cold pull to try to free that up to not actually burn out that nozzle. Speaking of nozzle differences, so yes, easily swappable, has that servo motor, but they've simplified the tool head a little bit. So there is still a tool head camera that allows you to use the extra calibration plate. It's the optional accessory to buy to recalibrate the whole tool head and realign it and kind of renew the accuracy every couple of weeks or months. But they have removed the nozzle camera that was in the H2D, and that was previously used for spaghetti detection, touch-off detection, and just reliability in general. They've now reassigned that AI failure detection to the corner camera, the remote monitoring camera that oversees the entire build plate. I think that's probably a combination of cost cutting to get this a little more affordable, as well as maybe a trust in the software detection of that corner camera. Something that this doesn't have, of course, is the bird's eye camera on the non-laser model, and on the software side, something that I think a lot of users had been asking for is the ability to remote tap into more than just that one corner camera. Remote tap into the tool head camera or the bird's eye camera from the desktop or mobile applications. That would be really useful if you're running a whole fleet of printers remotely and just need to see what's going on from a different point of view or different vantage point. Another way they have streamlined and maybe cut down on the cost of this machine is no more side windows. The chassis largely remains the same. I see a lot of the similar components from the H2S, the H2D. There's even that second PTFE hole from the back that's plugged up right now because this cannot be upgradable into a dual extruder version, but no side windows, which I thought were a really nice feature in the H2D. The laser version of this, and there is a laser version, does have the green tinted window, and this can be upgraded. The standard version can be upgraded with an upgrade kit to the laser version, but something I did miss was those side windows. Like the H2D, the way you get files on this is either through Wi-Fi, so this is a Wi-Fi connection, no Ethernet connection, and like the H2D, still no onboard storage. You're relying on using an external USB key that you provide yourself to store your time lapses that you're recording or transfer and send files from the computer to the printer to queue up. I don't think it would have been maybe that expensive to put in 16 gigs of storage, so that's a little bit frustrating, but it's maybe, again, one of those decisions that they made to separate this from a maybe future enterprise model, like we saw with the X1C and the X1E. I could see a H2E version that has features like built-in storage and Ethernet for using LAN mode. Finally, I want to talk about the AMS2 Pro. This is the same AMS2 Pro, exactly the same that shipped with the H2D, but like I said, in these past 4 months since using it, this has become one of my favorite features in this current generation. Not only does it have the built-in filament dryer that you can use that's powered by the printer itself, or you can also plug this into the previous generation of printers, the X line, and plug into a power supply. That's super convenient. Bambu has promised compatibility with the A1 printer, but as of right now, in late August, no firmware updates yet to get the AMS2 Pro working with the A1, so we're still crossing our fingers and holding our breath for that. But some features I didn't get a chance to talk about last time that have really become useful is, for example, unclogging stuck filament in the PTFE tubing. So the way this works with the AMS2, it feeds from these rollers into tube lines and then out the back. And there are 4 tubes, one for each of the spools here, that filament can get stuck in and has very easily gotten stuck in the first generation AMS, especially if you're using something like PLA Basic. If you let it sit for a while, it will get stuck, it will get snapped, and you'll have to unscrew it, disconnect cables to fish it out on the original AMS. AMS2 Pro makes that super easy. You remove the spools and quickly pull out the PTFE tubing and fish out the filament. So easy, no unplugging of wires, troubleshooting becomes a breeze. The other thing that we didn't realize is that this does some estimation as to remaining filament. And the assumption was that it would estimate how much filament was left in the spool based on how many prints you've done. If you register this with the RFID on the Bambu Lab spools, you go for a 100-gram print, another 100-gram print, it would estimate maybe 800 grams left. That's not how it actually works with the AMS2 Pro. It actually does some math to correlate the amount of filament pulled, the length of filament pulled through the extruder from the AMS2, as well as the amount of rotation that the spool has, the radials here. Having those two numbers, how much of rotation, how many rotations related to how much length it's expected to pull into the system, they can estimate the radius of where the filament is left in the spool, that radius and diameter. And based on their knowledge of how their spools are wound, that tells you, or that tells the system how much filament is left. Now, you do need that RFID tag to detect the turns and the rotations, but if you take that tag off of any Bambu spool and put it in a third-party spool, it will also estimate the amount of filament left on that one. So really nice little feature of the AMS2 Pro. So let's wrap up by talking about pricing. As a companion piece to the H2D, you can almost think of this as what the P1 line of printer was to the X1 line. A lot of the similar shared features, a lot of skimped down features here and there that they thought might not be necessary, and you're still getting a similar, if not even bigger, taller build volume here. In my mind, if this went for $1,500, I think that'd be a great price, especially since the Bambu Lab H2D went up in price after launch because of tariffs. They must have factored that in by now. We didn't get pricing until this morning when we were shooting this review. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, it's Schrodinger's price tag, $1,500. Above that, wouldn't consider worth it. Under that, great. Turns out H2S without the AMS2 Pro, $1,250, which I think is a fantastic price. With AMS2 Pro, it's $1,500, and the laser version is $2,100. And the way these things go, typically over time, I could see the H2S even going further down in price for holiday sales and via different distributors and whatnot. Which means if you're building a print farm and you don't need a bunch of different multicolor prints, you're just looking for a big build plate or big build volume, it becomes a very practical decision to choose this over the H2D, especially if you still want to upgrade to a laser or something in the future. I still think that the X1C is probably the workhorse on the Bambu line of printers. They're still making that. The price has gone down even recently on that to $800. So I'd still recommend that if you don't need the large build volume. And what I'd love to see as a follow-up is Bambu taking that dual nozzle system from the H2D and putting it in a smaller printer like the X1 line. So you have something kind of like the X2D. Maybe that's what they would call it. I don't know. That one I could see actually costing more than this because I know it's probably more expensive to get those dual nozzles in that. And I know it'd be a reduced volume with a smaller footprint, but I know a bunch of people out there are printing multicolor objects for reselling and for retail with small businesses, and the efficiencies and the filament savings and the time savings of having dual nozzles really is unmatched if you're doing multi-material printing. Single material, large volume, this is probably the price to beat at this price point right now. It is launch day. I'm sure people have a bunch of questions, so please feel free to post them in the comments below. Is this what you expected? Is this what you hoped for from Bambu halfway through the year in this generation? Let me know, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the comments and see you next time.
Thank you guys so much for watching that video. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you we have some excellent merch. We have a 5-pack of demerit badges for sale right now at tested/store.com. We've got the I hung it off of level demerit badge, the I built the chair backwards demerit badge, the I hit my thumb with a hammer demerit badge. We've got the stapler in my finger demerit badge, and my favorite, I stuck the duct tape to itself demerit badge. Get yours now, tested/store.store. Tested-store. Tested. It's right here. There. Just click there.